So today we're here with Betty. Betty, we thought it would be a great idea for anyone interested in your home, rather than myself to translate this home. I thought that you would do a much better job of it.
Right.
So thank you for letting us interview you today. And I think that I'd like to start at the beginning, if you don't mind, a little bit of a story as to
Yes.
when you first bought this house was.
Well, we were newly married. We were looking for our first home, and my husband found the house up in an estate agent's at Janelli. It had been for sale for 2 years, and people were a little bit frightened because it was very different and very unusual. But anyway, we came down and we saw it and we fell in love with it, and we had plans for what we were going to do with it. This was the beginning of our dream.
And what year was that?
So we decided that we'd take it. We went up to the council to have a look at the plans, and the council heard our story and were quite dismayed, because when they looked at the plans, they said, well, there's no house there, that's just a block of land. So the original builders of the house had never had anything passed. And you didn't in those days.
It was
you
different
bought your
then, wasn't it?
land, and they pitched a tent here. They came out from Scotland after the First World War, pitched a tent on the land. It was cheap, so they bought a double block and lived in the tent for years.
While they built the house?
While they built the house. The two things Tom had, that was the original builder, he was a ship's engineer, he had welding equipment, and he had a mould for making cement blocks. So the husband and wife and the 4 children lived in a tent, and weekends and after school they made cement blocks until they'd made enough to build the garage. And then they all moved into the garage, and for the next 30 years made enough cement blocks to build this house.
So one by one, by hand?
One by one,
They slowly
bit
built
by
this
bit.
house.
By that time the children had grown up, left home, and Tom and his wife were getting on a bit, so they decided to sell. So between the 1920s and the 1950s, they built this house.
And you bought this what year, can you recall?
And we bought this in the early 60s.
Early 60s?
Yes, the early 60s, and we had no money, we borrowed the deposit, but we bought the whole property for £4,200. So we started off, we needed the materials to build this addition. And at the time they happened to be pulling down the very old original terraces that were built in the early colony around Glebe, and they were all made from convict made bricks. And so Colin was passing with his truck, and he bought a couple of truckloads of the old convict bricks, which they were pulling down to build extensions for the university in Glebe. Anyway, we bought those bricks for practically nothing. Many years later, these convict-made bricks had become very expensive, but we bought them for practically nothing. And so we were able to build this room, and it was nearing completion, but it didn't have a roof at that stage. So Colin happened to hear about them pulling down the old wharves to make way for Darling Harbour. So out he went with his little truck, and he scrounged these beams from the old wharves, and that completed the room. And then I don't know where Colin got all his information, but he got all this information, but stuff that was going cheap. And then he heard that they were pulling down the old tram shed at Bennelong Point to build the Opera House. So down he went with his little truck again, and he loaded up with beams from the old tram shed, and we brought them in and put them up in the dining room and drawing room.
So you had a handmade house at the start.
Absolutely.
With an extension that was built from convict bricks.
Yes.
And pieces of timber from famous landmarks in Sydney.
Absolutely.
It's quite an interesting house, isn't it?
No tradesperson has ever had a hand in what we did here.
Yeah.
And the original owner, Tom, who built the place, he was a ship's engineer, and he was a snuff taker.
What is that?
Well, snuff is it's a sweet tobacco that you put up your nose.
Right.
Like you snort it.
Right.
Actually, I think it was the original people's, snort.
Right.
And for absolutely 12 months after we'd moved into the house, the smell of snuff was absolutely everywhere.
Right.
Because he was a very strong snuff taker. And the smell of the snuff just became part of the house. It was absolutely...
We can't smell it now.
So we got it. Sadly, it's all gone.
Yeah, that's right.
We didn't have to buy our snuff. We were just inhaling, old Tom's fumes.
Now, when we bring people through your home to have a look about considering buying it, what do you think they're going to notice?
Well, they're going to notice two things, one inside and the other one out. To me, the outstanding thing about this property is the land, its position and the view, the bird life, and to me, that's stunning. The inside of the property is not everybody's idea, but we love old things and clutter, and so the inside suits us perfectly.
And you used to own an antique shop, is that right?
Yes, we had a little antique shop just over, you come over Tom Ugly's Bridge, and there's a little set of shops there, and we had our little antique shop there in the set of shops.
Yeah, and is that what started your sort of collection at home as well?
It's a funny thing, but my whole family are collectors. Like my sister and her husband were collectors, and I think they started us off. And then Colin and I became collectors. My father and mother then became collectors. It became a family thing. And so we're all into old stuff.
Yeah. And what are you going to do with all this stuff when you move? But you're downsizing, right? So
well, until 12 months ago, when my health deteriorated, I never thought for 1 minute that I was ever going to leave. All my friends and everybody knows that I always said they would take me out of here in a box, that I was never going to leave. Been here probably between 50 and 60 years, and my identification was, well, my husband had died earlier. I lost him, but I decided to stay here and carry on, which I did. So our lives were part of the house. That was it, collecting and adding on, and that, and we had lots of puppies and kittens, but no children, and so the house was our child.
Yeah. For people that, if someone was to move in here, what's the one thing that what's the one bit of advice you might give someone that was to move in here? What to expect?
Oh dear. dear, look, this house is, this house is not easy. But with all its faults and its difficulties and its all the things that were wrong with it, we didn't care. We loved it and we put up with it. It was just part of living here. And as well, with the new addition, as things got easier to live here, that was a bonus. But we'd been through all the hard parts when we were young. But when you're young, you can put up with anything. And we were, they call it now living the dream. But I mean, we were.
You were, yeah.
We were in those days. We were living the dream. It was our dream.
Yeah. I think people watching this obviously will probably be thankful of you telling us the story about the home. I think a few people might even connect with you too, Betty, and really warm to you as we have. As you've said to me, though, that some people may not want to keep the home, and in some cases you're okay with that if that was their journey. You obviously would like someone to keep it like you did, but you know that someone might want to change it.
Yeah, look, to some extent, Andrew, I've come to terms with that. I mean, Colin and I, well, the original Scottish family created it. We continued it on.
Yep.
It's been the love of my life. And now I realise that I have to say goodbye to it, and rather than stay here like Miss Havisham, in the Dickens novel, and just let everything deteriorate around me, I can't do that.
Yep.
I want somebody else to come here and love it. Now, whether they fall in love with the house and want to move in, or like we did, fall in love with the land and the view and that. Either way, whoever buys this house is going to love it.
Yep.
That's why they're going to buy it. And I'm happy with that.
I think that's a good message. I think people would want to know that, that you're okay with whatever they do with it next.
Yes, because I've had my absolute pleasure from this house. Yeah. And yes, it's like everything. They say all good things come to an end. And I had no idea, Andrew, that I was going to feel like this. I thought I could never let it go. I thought I would cling on to the bitter end. But no, it's not like that.
Yeah, and we talked about this before we recorded this, that you've decided just to let it be, and all the things in getting it ready, and the people doing reports and waking you up early and bringing salespeople through.
I know, it's been a nightmare.
And you've been just wonderful with that, and you've just decided just to roll with the punches, and that's something I admire that about you, Betty. So
well, I lost my husband many years ago. He died young. And the fact that I've stayed here means that he stayed here too. So that was my way, basically, of holding on to him, because he's every bit of this house. Yeah. He built this room, the beams, he did, and all he did, he had a bricklayer in to help him. So, I mean, yes, it's the house is us.
Thank you for sharing all your thoughts and your understanding about this home. Yes. There's no way I think I could have translated this like you have, so I think people will really appreciate it.
This interview has been a bit emotional.
I imagine you've done well, done better than me, I think.
But I've loved sharing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you today. You've been wonderful, and
pleasure.
Now we've got to get on with the showing people.
Now you can edit me out.
All right.